Welcome back to Learn Your Stripes. I'm Ryan Guillory.
And I'm Michael Moran, and today we're going to talk about communicating, signaling, and how to handle the clock.
As a reminder, the purpose of this podcast, at least initially, is to cover the new IHSAA Football Officials Mechanics Manual and best practices for a crew of 5. It's our objective to provide another means of learning the manual through these brief podcast sessions and to try to demystify the changes and also emphasize how much has remained the same. A review of the manual shows that the IHSAA has not completely reinvented the wheel. Soon, once we've completed the manual, we're going to move into rules, both high school and college, and we'll add guests as well. This is a reminder as well that although we're covering the new manual, the podcast is solely for educational purposes. It is neither approved nor sanctioned by the IHSAA or any other conference. Nothing discussed in this podcast has been discussed with anyone from the IHSAA. It's merely our interpretation of the new mechanics manual after reviewing it.
And we hope you all enjoyed last week's episode, and we left you with a play. I'll go ahead and reiterate it here, and it's a bit wordy, so bear with us. 2nd and 10 for A at the B40. A10 throws a legal forward pass, which B32 intercepts at the B20. B32 returns the interception along A's sideline and is downed at the 50. During B32's return, the head linesman unintentionally runs into an assistant coach on the A sideline in the restricted area at the B45. And that was kind of wordy, so we appreciate everybody hanging with us. The answer for this is going to be found in Rule 948. Even though this was an assistant coach, A's head coach has assessed a 15-yard non-player contact penalty. And this is going to be enforced from the succeeding spot, which is a 50 in this case. B is going to retain the ball and have 1st and 10 from the A35, so we're backing them up 15. And a second offense would result in the disqualification of A's head coach.
And Michael, since you and I are both wings, I know that these are the types of plays that to some level annoy us if we don't get injured, hopefully. But any contact like that's not something that we want, and that's why the rule exists to avoid it. So we talked last week about not throwing a flag in anger at someone with some extra demonstration or anything like that. So this is one of those where we need to keep our cool throwing the flag and assessing this penalty as well.
Well, absolutely, and I think the important part here is not so much the foul that's happening; it's the precursor to that, right? Keep the sidelines clear. Every opportunity you have on a kickoff or a punt return, take a peek down your shoulder, make sure it's clear. Announce your presence if you have to. Give me the white, please. I need the sideline, please. Pre-game can go a long way with this too, and then of course your get-back coach have good contact, good conference with them before the game, so we can keep that sideline open for us.
Yeah, I think the get back coach is important, obviously, for us to set up a relationship with that person. I also had this discussion recently. I know that there's a debate and everybody has their preference. We have the big white strip on the sideline. Where are we standing? Are we on the edge of the field? Or are we at the back of it? I personally, both for vision purposes and for this reason, I like to stand at the back of it. I think I get a better view the more, the wider view of it that I get. But I also think that by standing at the back, the coaches are going to be behind me, right? And I always feel if I move up too close to the sideline, the coaches and the players, they tend to creep up, right? And I don't want to have to spend all my time pushing them back. So the more time that I spend at the back of the white, I feel personally, and others might have a different view of it, but I personally feel that I'm going to have a more controlled sideline and I'm going to be safer going up and down.
Absolutely, I agree that everybody wants to get closer and closer to the game. I have yet to figure out why that is, but that's just the nature of it, I suppose. I'm the same way. I have preferably my toes are on the back of the white, if not my heels at the worst, and that helps keep space and distance, try to keep everybody safe, and keeps me off the field. So, again, appreciate everybody's input on this. Hopefully you learned something from this question. These are kind of things that we want to get into. We want to start talking about how we interpret rules, how we interpret philosophy. We do just have to get through the manual the first time around. So appreciate you bearing with us. I think, Ryan, with that, do you want to start talking about what we're here today for with the clock?
Absolutely. As much as we want to get back on the field, we look forward to Friday nights, Saturdays, whenever we're working. Games do have to end at some point in time. So for that reason, we have to have good, effective clock operators for these games. By that token, though, no matter how good we might be, we could have the best game that the five of us have ever had. but the game's not going to run smoothly if we don't have good game and play clock operators. The good ones, really, we don't ever notice. We just see the clock rolling smoothly. We don't think about it. Bad ones make for a slow game where we're constantly pumping the play clock, resetting the game clock. So some of the methods that we have to deal with this, the step one really is for the referee to meet with the game clock operator prior to the game to go over timing procedures. At that point, they'll discuss the general instructions for play clock operators, which some of those things that we'll have include what we talked about last week with the signals that we have to kill the game clock. That would include that overhead swiping, or if we have an incomplete pass, the 2 swipes in front of the chest, followed in Indiana by the hand up for the 40-second play clock signal. Remember, no matter what level we're at, game clock first, then play clock. Stop the game clock, then we do whatever we need to with the play clock. Along the lines of what we do with the game clock needs to be stopped when there's a down that ends following a foul or a legal kick, when there's an official's timeout that's taken or charged, or a TV or radio timeout is granted, when a period ends, when the ball ends up out of bounds or a forward pass is incomplete, when we award a fair catch, or when an obvious first down has occurred. We also stop the game clock for an official's timeout. That's the same signal from us, overhead signal given twice, followed by tapping the hands on our chest twice. Now, what we use officials' timeouts for would include things such as the measurement for possible first down, before first down is declared, following a change of team possession, if we have a reason that we need to notify captains and coaches of the time remaining in the game. Let's say the game clock goes out or malfunctions along the way.
Hopefully you never have that.
You don't want it to happen, but you have to be prepared, right? Part of the manual is just to be prepared for the worst case scenarios for everything. We'll also use officials' timeouts if we see a player who appears to be injured. Again, part of that football code, we never know exactly when there's an injury, but if someone appears injured, we've got to get the timeout and get that person attended to. If we see some sort of equipment repair that needs to take place, should there be some issue with weather where we need to either dry off or change the ball out for some unusual reason, early, what we might face in the next few weeks, who knows at this point. But if there's unusual heat or humidity, if we have one of those really hot games where we get the word to take extra water breaks along the way, that's an official's timeout. If we have one of those coach-referee conferences regarding whether a rule is correctly applied, hopefully we don't have to have many or any of those this year, but they have the right to ask sometimes, I'm sure. Sometimes after a foul, we may need some additional time to administer a penalty, but we may not need to tap the hands on the chest for that. If there's an unusual delay getting the ball ready for play, again, if we have a TV or radio timeout or another official's timeout, not one that we signal, but the 1 minute period that we have between periods following a try or field goal or safety. Now, the game clock can also stop as set forth in the rules if there's a team that attempts to consume time illegally as provided in Rule 346, or when the covering official determines that the ball has reached the line to gain. And there, we don't do the tapping on the chest for the official timeout. We would kill the clock, signal first down, get the 40-second clock going.
I personally would love to be on a game where we're stopping clocks for TV and radio timeouts. I think that's always something we can work towards, right? If it's a game of the week, or maybe if you're lucky enough to make an appearance in the state finals or something like that, that's always would be a dream and a blast. So we've talked about stopping the clock. Let's talk about starting the clock. And again, we're going to start the clock with the wind, the big kind of overhand swing there. Just one arm is good enough. I don't think it matters necessarily which arm you use. I think if you can face the press box or your arm close to this press box you can use, that's fine. If you're using your right hand because you're right-handed or left hand because you're left-handed, I think you're okay. Just as long as the signal is clear and distinct, we're not going to worry about that. All right, for an official's timeout, other than any new series for Team A or B or following a legal kick, obviously we have an inadvertent whistle. We talked about that last week. It's something you never want to have, but that's the case where we're going to start the clock over again. And in certain dead ball situations, too, we're going to start that game clock, and that's going to be on our signal. In contrast, we start the game clock on the snap if it was stopped for any other reason. And so if we do have a clock starting on the snap, there's no signal needed. I know that's kind of an old school thing that used to be done a lot. And then some of those throwback videos I watched, guys, I don't know how they didn't tear their rotator cuff or throw their shoulder out of socket there. But that's that can be discussed with your game clock operator, that if we're on the snap, we're on the snap. They can view that action and go. If we've got a free kick, remember we're going to start the clock as soon as R touches the ball in play. If it's touched by K, we're not going to start the clock. Hopefully, in that case, we've got a beanbag down for first touching. And then, of course, if we start it for any reason by mistake, we'll stop the clock. We'll get together if we have to, make sure the time is right, and then we'll get going. So part of this mechanic in this manual, too, is winding the clock when the ball is actually in play and then when it becomes dead. So when the ball has become dead, manual talks about within 2 yards of the sideline to go ahead and give the wind the clock signal. 2 yards can be kind of close. Some crews adopt the mentality of if we get outside the numbers to go ahead and wind it. And what that can signal to both the game clock and your referee is, hey, he's in bounds. The player's still in bounds. We didn't achieve a first down or anything of that variety. The clock should be running just so we're keeping the time moving. Ryan, you want to talk about adjusting the game clock?
Yeah, before I get there, though, we were just talking about winding. I think it's important to not get too wrapped up in that. We don't want one of those situations where we run up to the spot, we wind it, and then we realize we're a yard past the line to gain. So part of winding, we're recognizing where we are in relation to the sideline, but also we have to keep in mind where the line to gain is, so that if we have a first down achieved, whether it's in bounds or out of bounds, we're still killing the clock, and then we're giving the referee information, either with a little wind in our hand or wrist and an X to show that the clock should be dead, and we're starting on the snap.
That's a great point. You talked about winding and killing and starting. And I know in Indiana we give the stop the clock and then we give the signal for the play clock. But there's not really a scenario where we should achieve a first down, wind it, stop it, and play clock. I think if we get to that point, that's too many hand gestures there. So Ryan makes a great point about knowing where you are on the field and where your line to gain is.
Yeah. But even if there is some error with the clock, we're permitted to adjust the clock. It's a judgment call ultimately, though. As with anything else, the more critical the situation, the more exact we're going to need to be in terms of what we're doing. But here, in terms of handling the game clock, we're more likely to adjust significant errors near the end of a half. Now, what the manual tells us is that the referee should use the 5-with-5 guideline. And what that means is that outside of 5 minutes remaining in either half, we need to have an error of more than 5 seconds in order to adjust the game clock. Within 5 minutes of the end of either half, all clear errors should be corrected. So to throw in a personal anecdote, you will remember this game when I whiteheaded a couple years ago. And my anxiety level was slightly high. I adjusted 3 seconds on the clock pretty early on in the first quarter. In hindsight, that should not have been done, but it happened. But going forward, we want to use that 5-with-5 guideline. We need something big to adjust it outside of there. As we get near the end of a half or near the end of the game, that's where everything becomes a little bit more critical there.
Absolutely. So let's talk about play clock now. We mentioned earlier R should be meeting with the play clock operator. I know in our crew, it's our referee and our back judge. I think sending both up there is a good case because you get two sets of eyes up there, and everybody can review all the material, make sure we're all on the same page. And in some instances, if you've only got one clock on your field, like a lot of schools do, your referee may be watching the clock or your back judge may be watching the clock. So it's important that everybody is kind of on the same there. Page 20 of the manual talks about the chart for a 40-second play clock and a 25-second play clock. Again, Indiana just recently adopted the 40-second play clock. Personally, I think it's been a great addition to our game. We're going to use the 40 for dead ball, in or out of bounds, or an incomplete pass, or when Team A gets a first down. And then we'll go back to the 25 if there's a penalty we have to look forward to or look at, a charge timeout, if there's a measurement, if we get some kind of weird change of possession with Team A retaining the ball after B had already achieved possession at one point. If we have just a general change of possession and B is going to put the ball in play next, we'll start with a 25-second play clock. You guys kind of get the idea there, and that's all listed out in the manual for us. If we do get a helmet coming off, we've got a difference of play clock there. The defensive player has a helmet come off, we're going to set it to 40 seconds. And if the offensive player has a helmet come off, we'll go to 25 seconds.
Yeah, and I think that this chart that's on page 20 is awfully helpful. I think another thing that we need to note is that when it comes to a 25-second clock versus a 40-second clock, all 5 members of the crew need to have knowledge of this, right? We can't rely on, you can't have one rules person or one mechanics person and hope that they're going to get this right. This is very basic stuff that as a crew, we've got to get right. So if the other 4 members of the crew are missing it, you'd better fix it. Just an important part of our mechanics, an important part of having us and having a game that runs smoothly and us looking good at the end of it.
Absolutely, and everybody needs to be involved in knowing that, but not everybody needs to be involved at the end of each play. The mechanics manual talks about how to signal that 40-second clock. So assume we have a 1st and 10 and a run up the middle, and we pick up 5 or 6 yards. Your wing's going to be coming in, marking the spot, and just raise your hand over your head to signal the start of that 40-second play clock. I know Ryan on our crew, usually both of us are putting our hand up, just it helps out the play clock operator. But if you have a scenario where the referee, back judge, umpire, and both line of scrimmage guys are putting their hand up, that's probably too many hands, and I don't think we need to have that. So
yeah, and I think it's effective for us to have H&L with the hand up because it helps me to find your spot. You know, if we're working in college, there's a few 6'4", 6'5" line of scrimmage officials that they're easy to see across the field. You and I are a lot closer to the 5'11", 6 foot range. So seeing over the players, having that arm up helps me figure out where you are 53 yards away.
That's right. This is a podcast. They don't see us. Yes, those of you at home, I did not hit the 6 foot mark. So yes, absolutely. And then again, when we're talking about the play clock, we've got the responsibility of signaling that incomplete pass. And then by our mechanics, we're going to signal incomplete, swiping or that safe sign, and then bringing your hand above your head to start that play clock. Ultimately, your back judge is going to manage that play clock and understand when it's running. Again, hopefully it is running and isn't going out or flickering or anything like that. If not, we talked about having the appropriate tools, a watch to keep that time. And that way they can keep it on their watch and they can indicate when we're at 25 or 40. And even as we start to get down to the last 5 seconds, they need to be telling that. But hopefully we don't have that happen. When the play clock does expire, though, B should take their initial focus off the clock. And if we hit 0, look down and see if the ball is snapped. If the ball has snapped right at that time, we're going to let it go. If the snap hasn't already started, then we're going to have a foul for delay game. There's a little bit of judgment in there, but I think the overall theme here is not to be so demonstrative with that play clock hitting 0 that it's a foul immediately. Make sure that snap is moving or not moving, rather.
Right. I think the best way I've heard it described is that you take an extra beat if we're thinking of music or something, right? We see 0, we're adding in that extra step. Is the ball up? Is it still down? If it's down, we've got a foul. If it's coming up, we're going to play on. Again, it's sort of the whole idea of not being overly technical. You know, just because the clock hits 0, there's portions of that last second as well that we account for by looking up and down in that process. We talked about running the clock. How do we stop the clock? Well, there's 3 types of timeouts that might be taken. First, there's charged timeouts. There's no significant changes set forth in the manual. It merely formalizes the process that we've done for years and years and years. Importantly, though, it emphasizes that conferences are not to be held during this time. When we have a charged timeout, the official that hears the request needs to blow the whistle and signal 2 times to stop the clock. The rest of the crew repeats the timeout signal twice. Any penalty that we need to enforce needs to be completed before we grant the timeout. When we grant the timeout, all 5 officials need to look up at the game clock when the timeout is granted to make sure that it's stopped properly, because this may be a scenario where we need to add some time back on if the clock keeps running after we call for a timeout. Here, we need all 5 officials to take out the game card, as we discussed last week, to record the period, the time, the team calling the timeout, and who from that team. Typically it'll be a coach, but you might have a player call it on the game card. The crew will confirm with each other the remaining number of timeouts that each team has left. Now, during a timeout, it's not a time for us to huddle together in the middle of the field, talk about what happened 2 plays ago or anything of that sort. We're not supposed to gather in groups unless there's some reason that we need to discuss something at that specific time. During the timeout, we're also not to engage in discussions with the coaches or the players. Finally, we need to make sure that if there's a sideline conference, it's held in front of the team box and outside of the 9-yard marks.
You mentioned penalty there, Ryan, and I can think of a scenario that I had where I think we had a DPI, I think, and maybe a personal foul that followed up, and the coach was just upset more at his players, just the way the scenario was unfolding. He wanted a timeout to just calm his team down, get their heads back in the game. And he looked at me and said, "Can I have a timeout?" And I said, "Absolutely, you may." I was only aware of the DPI. I didn't know that we had a dead ball foul as well after that down. So I'm granting him a timeout. He's calling his team over, and we haven't even begun to enforce what was going on. It was an absolute mess. So I think going back to crew communication and everybody being aware of what's going on is very important. And then once the timeout begins, like you said, we can't all come together. We have our responsibilities. Everybody should have an area that they're kind of responsible for. Once the referee indicates the timeout is done, or the timeout has taken place, rather, they should be announcing that to the press box. If you've got a mic, we'll talk about that later. You can announce that over the mic, and then indicate which team is taking that timeout. The referee, along with everybody else, should be taking out their game card, like you mentioned, marking down the time for the timeout, who took it, and how many they have left. And then the referee can notify the coach of how many he might have. The manual talks about the referee observing Team B during the timeout, and when B reports, during watching Team B during the timeout, and we'll talk about who's watching Team A. The back judge is then going to report that there's 45 seconds that have elapsed during the timeout to the referee. If you've got an 020, use your 020. If not, come up with a crew signal. And when the Team A conference is between the 9-yard marks, he's going to notify Team A, hey, we've got 15 seconds. We need to be ready for play. Once AR determines the team's ready for play, timeout's over. Then we're going to signal the ball ready for play, and we're going to chop it in, as they say. During this time, the umpire should be over the ball, making sure that it doesn't move for any reason. And after the back judge reports that the 45 seconds have expired, and we've got 15 seconds left to go, the Team B conference is being held there. U notifies Team B to come back in and come out of their huddle to be ready for play. The umpire is going to look at all the action going on by A, make sure everybody's legal, talk about chin straps, mouthpieces, all that. Everybody's buckled up and ready to play. And again, the R is going to chop it in.
Yeah, you and I as H&L, we have some work to do here too. During a timeout, we're supposed to move to a position that's halfway between the ball and our sideline to observe our team. Once the back judge tells us that 45 seconds have passed, if the conference is outside the 9-yard marks, we notify our respective coach that the timeout's going to end in 15 seconds with something as simple as, "Coach, the ball will be marked ready for play in 15 seconds. We also need to be alert for substitutions, including substitutions that might be for the purpose of deception. So if the conference is between the 9-yard marks, we have to maintain that the proper number of players, 11 players, and team attendance 3 are within that conference. We have to be aware of them trying to sneak on the lonesome end or something like that while this is going on. Finally, once the teams are getting back out on the field, we tell our coach the number of timeouts that each team has left. We've discussed this a few times, but the back judge times the timeout. They'll give us a whistle, 2 whistles after 45 seconds have passed. The back judge makes eye contact with the referee at that 45-second mark, and then gives 2 more whistle blasts once 60 seconds are gone.
So we're talking about these are team timeouts, charged conference timeouts. Then there's also injury timeouts that can stop the clock as well. Procedures are nearly identical in this case, but I think the important thing here that we want to highlight is player safety. If you have a player go down, that's where your focus is. Now, not all 5 officials need to come in together over this player. It might depend upon where that player is. Are they further downfield or the nearest sideline? But the covering official, rather, should keep players away and kind of clear the area and make sure that we don't have anybody getting in there and either continue to damage the player by any unsportsmanlike act or anything like that, or any taunting going on. I know it's common for teammates to want to get around their player and try to support him, but we need to get them out of the way so medical personnel can get in there. At this point, things can get a little disorienting, so we need to control the field and we need to know what happened, how did the play end. That way, when we come out of this injury, we're not lost ourselves. And we also need to make sure the medical personnel can get to where they need to and tend to the player. Ryan, have you ever had an issue where you had a strange injury or anything like that happen, or anything get in your way?
The only one I remember is a player who was very slowly limping to the sideline, with the whole entire sideline, as you might expect, yelling at him to get down. And he was sort of in no man's land. He gets outside the numbers, and he's within a step of the sideline at the snap. So I was kicking around in my head. I didn't flag it for substitution. I knew what was going on. He wasn't participating. He was getting off of the field. I don't know why he didn't go down, but I guess in those moments where you're injured, it's you're not necessarily always thinking clearly. But in hindsight, I would probably, with a few more years of experience at this point, I'd probably just kill that play. Don't risk anything happening there. It's clear he's injured. He's trying to get off the field. I could give him a hand there. But I think too, we often think about injuries in terms of a player laying on the field, or the type of injuries where you have to call out the trainer, call out the carp. It's our jobs to look for concussions. If we see somebody sort of staggering around, blinking the eyes, looking confused, that's an injury as well. And that's obviously a point of emphasis at the moment. So that's on us to do. And part of that, that's why there's rules against tinted visors, against mirrored visors. We need to be able to look at the player's eyes, see what's going on there, if there's some reason for us to need to step in and get a player out. So injury timeouts aren't just the player down on the field telling us they're injured. It's also things and signs that we need to be looking for as well.
Absolutely. If you don't get a response from a player, it's important for us at that point to shut the play down and get the player help if they need it. I had a play a couple of years ago where coverage was going, the defensive back was covering the receiver. The receiver went in and then out. The defensive back turned, and I thought I saw this ACL tear, knee pop out of place. He went down and he grabbed his knee right away, and I killed the play and waved for the trainer to come over. And then this particular individual got up and said, "Why'd you stop it?" And I said, "Because you went down and grabbed your knee. I didn't know what else to do." So he let me know his opinion on that, and then he went to his sideline. So, but I think that's it is what it is. We have to protect the players. Safety is of the utmost importance, and we want to make sure that they're playing the game they're in, finishing the game, and then able to come back next week as well. So, the last time we're going to oh, sorry, Ryan, I just cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when in doubt, err on the side of safety.
Absolutely.
And I understand those situations are a little tricky, but get the player out if he's looking injured. Get the timeout. Get him out of there.
The last form of timeout is an official's timeout, and this is one that I think we use pretty rarely. But again, it's more for administrative and clerical errors, for lack of a better term. That if we have to get something right, if we have to make sure a penalty was enforced correctly, or we have to adjust the clock like we talked about, same signal, giving the two hands over the head, and get together and fix whatever issue needs to be resolved. So I think, Ryan, you want to talk about forward progress a little bit?
Yeah, I'm not going to go in terrible detail here. You can read in the manual or the rule book, forward progress in general. There's really nothing new here. It's as it's always been. Kill the play when the forward progress is over. Anything else, we're going to risk injuries. You hate those plays where forward progress is stopped. You're getting ready to blow the whistle. You're a little bit late and the ball pops out. And then you have to, say, hey, the player's down. I've got progress. It's just cleaner, both in terms of how it looks and in terms of injuries, or preventing injuries, of course, to kill it once we have that forward progress is killed. Obviously, you hit on this earlier. If we have forward progress stopped inbounds, but near the sideline, wind the clock unless we have a first down. Otherwise, if we do have a first down, then we'll kill the clock there. But part of the idea of forward progress, again, as I said, is we're going to prevent those plays where we've got a close-looking fumble right after progress is stopped. But if we have a play where we don't have forward progress stopped and we have a clear fumble, what do we do in those situations, Michael?
Well, I think if we've got a fumble, again, this is again nothing new. The manual does cover it, but it doesn't change anything. If there's a covering official is going to see that fumble, you should be putting a beanbag down, because we might have to do something from that spot. If a player is down and reaches out and has possession of that ball, then we should be killing it immediately, so that, again, we don't have any injuries. But if it's live, it's going to play on, and it's that covering official's responsibility to make sure that they are observing that action. Again, we put that beanbag down and we know where we're going. Eventually, the play will become dead, and you may have a pile. So if you do have players going in, again, we're killing the clock. The nearest official on our crew is, what we call the digger, and you're going to get in there and start looking for the ball, pulling players back. We have done a pretty good job in the past. Not that we've had a lot of fumbles, but the ones that we've had, we're usually pretty good at. Usually a wing or an umpire is digging, and then it's a wing or an umpire who's coming over, kind of clearing players out. Now, the thing that everybody kind of wants to do is, hey, the ball's loose, there's excitement, and it's easy to get sucked into all of that. It's important, I think, especially for the 2 or 3 officials that aren't directly involved in that play, to stay back. You're going to have potential cheap shots that might come in because, hey, we don't know if the play is over. You're going to have sidelines that are going to want to encroach. If Ryan and I have kind of abandoned our post to go into a pile, now that sideline might want to creep on, especially if they've retrieved the ball. So it's important to understand that you've got to have that spatial awareness and a wide field of vision. So stay back, stay out of the play, and make sure that you can see everything. So eventually you're going to get to the bottom of that pile, and you are going to find out who's come up with the ball. So whoever's there, somebody needs to give up and take a brief moment, understand what you've seen. Okay, white team has the ball. You're going to indicate to your referee, hey, we've got white team has the ball, and you're going to go ahead and give a point. And then it should be decisive. It should be able for everyone to see it, and you should be clear and confident when you give it.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think it's sort of 2 different scenarios. If it's clear that the offense recovered, obviously we're not going to point. We're going to give the next down. If we have the defense recovered, it's something that you or I or the umpire sees, then we're going to give a point there. If it's a long unpiling where we have to stop the clock, we have an official's timeout, that's the scenario where the manual says that only the referee should then give the signal there. So sort of a few different scenarios of what's going on. But if the offense recovers, no matter what happens, we're not pointing. We're going up with the next down, playing 2, playing 3, whatever it might be. But whether it's a fumble, whether we have a play without a fumble, just a straight scrimmage play, what do we do if we need to measure? If we're close to the line of game, but we're not quite sure. One of the benefits of artificial turf fields that seem to be becoming more and more prevalent is that it's decreased our need for measurements. But when we do need to measure, now it's perhaps even more critical than in the past.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. I agree with you totally there. No, you're fine. I had this thought there. One of the things you can do, especially if you have a turf field, you still want to make sure that your chains are 10 yards long. But one thing that I do is I get that first stake set where I want it. I'm trying as often as I can to get that stake set on a yard line. It makes things a little easier. In certain situations, if you do have, a short of a line to gain on a turnover and downs, then you might be halfway between yard lines there and you might have to work with that. But if we're coming off of a possession change, like a kick return or something like that, I'm trying to get on a yard line to make things easier for me.
Yeah, and certainly the manual talks about this. If we're in between the 20s, that's where we can set on a yard line, unless there's been a change of possession or something along those lines. But typically the plays that are going to be really close, either you or I, or really both of us, we're going to be crashing in. Hopefully one of us has the spot and we're calling for the ball. We're putting it down. Typically we can tell if we have a first down, especially on the turf fields. But if it's close, I'll signal to the referee that I don't know. He'll come up to take a look. And if thinks we need to measure, he'll kill the clock and call out the chains. And from there, that's when we conduct our measurement.
So during the measurement there, everybody's got their own assigned duties, and it is kind of fun because when you do have the turf fields and everything is marked clearly, if you have one, generally it's because the coach has requested one, or it is just too close to call. But this is kind of our time to shine, and this is where we get to make it look fun. As you say, we get to put a little flair and a little style into it. So the referee is going to call a timeout again at this point, like we've talked about, and we're going to signal to bring out the chains. The head linesman is going to look back to the clip personnel and say, okay, where did you clip this chain? I always talk in my pregame about clipping it on the back side of that big yard line, and you're going to bring it out. H is then going to carry the chains out along with the chain crew personnel, and once they're ready, we're going to lay it down, and the umpire gets a nice little moment here, get to take that front stake, and they're going to stretch it out. And then the referee is going to look down and see if we've actually achieved that line to gain. If we have, first down signal. If we're short, then they'll indicate by doing so. And that's kind of the pinch you see, or sometimes the two hands real close together. And then if we have to measure in the side zone, outside the hashes there, we're going to bring the chain in there with the clip, and we'll bring a new ball in and we'll set that down so we have the same distance. If we don't have to, because we're inside the middle of the field, we'll just return the chains back out. And obviously first down, it's much easier.
Yeah, I think that this is a really good pregame to go over every week with your crew. Read the manual. This is one where I think you need to review this and have each person's job down to a T. But before each game, go over who does what on a measurement, right? Michael is the H on our crew. He's the one pulling the chains out. As L, My job is probably the most limited of any position. I put my foot down on the chain at the spot of the clip, and I show them where to set the chain down with the clip as well, so that we can have a good straight pull. But it's important to make sure that we're putting our foot as the L on that chain to hold it steady. We saw some plays recently from the college level at a clinic you and I went to where looking at the back judge, we want to make sure the back judge is sort of downfield from the ball, away from the press box, so they're not blocking that view of the ball once the chains are stretched out. And then obviously the referee needs to be in a position there to see what's going on there. But I'd encourage all of you to go through the manual, make sure you know all the details of your job on a measurement.
Yeah, measurements absolutely important. I think that if we have everybody got in their assigned duties, you never know when you're going to have that measurement. It could show up at any time, whether you're on a grass field or a turf field. I've been a part of a couple crews too where we talked about measurements, and luckily that night we had a measurement and we looked sharp. It looks good.
Yeah, measurements are another one of those things. We don't do them terribly often, but they can make or break us, right? If you want to have credibility, have a nice clean measurement. If you want people to doubt you, bumble through that, and everyone in the stadium sees you out there, and it's an uncomfortable feeling. But it's easy to get it right. You just have to know what everyone's job is. We talked about this a little while ago as well. The manual emphasizes, so it's in the manual, something for us to follow. The manual emphasizes that inside either 20-yard line, we're not allowed to move the ball to start a series on a big line, right? So we want to make sure in theory that if we're in between the 20s, those 60-yard lines, 20 to 20, we can start a new series on a yard line so that we know on those turf fields, 10 yards is 10 yards, right? But if the series is starting inside of the 20, between the goal line and the 20, then no such adjustments are appropriate.
Absolutely, I agree. It's I know it's a game of inches, and we want to try to make it look good when we have game management, but I think the 20 getting down in the red zone there is important, where those inches do matter and those plays do matter. So I think we've talked a good amount about mechanics. I think we're going to kind of start wrapping up our conversation here, Ryan, with some crew communication, right?
Yeah, communication is important, even if I'm struggling with it a little bit tonight during this podcast. But crew communication on the field is vital. We need to have a consistent use of signals in order to let the rest of the members of the crew know what's going on. Now, of course, we've got the radios, and that obviously aids in our communications. But electronic communication is just that, it's an aid. There's certain suggested signals for us to follow when we're on the field, right? So we have players who we're counting. So we have certain officials counting the offense. I know R and U are typically counting the offense. H, L, and B, and correct me if I'm wrong because I don't work a lot of H, but I know L and B at least are counting the defense. So I think you are as well, right?
L and B have the defense. In this case, I'm busy with the chains in the box guy. I'm not counting, but on my crew, I do count offense just as a precautionary. But I think by the manual, I think it's I get lucky on this one.
Okay, well then strike that from me. That's why it's good to have an H here, so I'm not telling you what to do there, and I'm telling you wrong. But certain signals, so we're giving an 11-player count. We have a count for 11 players. We'll have a count for if we have more than 11. That's typically a thumb up or sort of moving the arm up. If we have fewer than 11, that's typically the thumb down. I know this is one of those where there are sort of different signals from different crews. I know some will sort of flash 10 fingers in front of the chest. Review this section, make sure that you know what you're doing, but make sure that R and U can communicate to each other if they have 10 or 12, and that L and B know how to communicate to each other if they've got 10 or 12 out there.
Absolutely. And another part of communication is just on the field. I know, again, we have those radios, but when the play is happening, there's a lot of other body language you can use if the pass has been juggled or if the receiver stepped out of bounds. And the manual, again, has a whole host of different mechanics and different visual signals that I didn't even know even existed. So most commonly we're using, if a pass was juggled or if we have, two stakes, we're holding up our hands kind of side by side there. Punching, I know Ryan and I use that mechanic a lot, that movement of punching back behind line of scrimmage, indicating if you've got that receiver backwards. These are just some examples, and I'd encourage everybody to get in here and just take a look and go kind of through all these. But now when we're not using our bodies and we're not using our verbals, we do have our radios. And I know, Ryan, you kind of brought the radios up earlier. Did you want to kind of cover some of those?
Yeah, I'm going to hit that. I just want to say briefly in terms of our physical signals that were given to one another. This came up at a clinic recently where somebody asked me, they weren't aware that we could use the juggling signal or hitting the ground if the ball hits the ground, or that sweeping out of bounds for a close sideline play or pass along the sidelines, and asked me when I would use it. And so in thinking through that, I'm more apt to use that. It's really situational awareness. I'm not going to be overly demonstrative on a 7-yard pass that may or may not have been trapped if it's 10 minutes to go in the first quarter and it's a 0-0 game. However, if it's 50 seconds left, a 4-point game, and the team that's down is driving, they're on the 15-yard line or so, then I'm probably going to be more likely to use one of those signals at that point in time, just because, again, the situation calls for it, right? It's knowing the game, knowing what's expected, and knowing, again, the situation that you're working at any point in time.
Right, when to sell your call. Absolutely.
Right. Both radios, again, it's a communication device. It's supposed to aid us. It's not supposed to become a crutch for us. If we use them, we'll need to have two-way radios with an earpiece and a push-to-talk microphone. We can't always leave them on while we're going throughout the game. Now, our radios aren't necessarily secure from the public. We want to make sure that we have a channel that's dedicated just to us. But I know we've had games before where all of a sudden we hear somebody on our channel, and then we always have a backup and we'll switch to that. But it's important to be mindful of what we're saying, even if we think it's just the 5 of us on that channel. We want to make sure that if it's not something we would want addressed throughout the stadium, it's not something that we say into a radio.
Absolutely. We have that game plan of here's our first channel, here's our second channel, and I think, Brian, you might hit on this too. We're not making dinner plans. We're using it to talk about, foul reporting is the best one, I think, when you've got to get a message across the field to your other coach, your other sideline. You can be preventative a lot of times if you realize some stuff's going on with some players, and number 62 has got a bit of a hothead. You can tell that to your coach. Your umpire might be in there and can relay that to you. Great way to use them.
Yeah, and it's also good to remind who has goal line, who has end line, if we're down there, especially on plays coming out. I'm not going to try to critique or embarrass any referees, but I know sometimes if we've got a ball, offense that's coming out of the end zone, they're inside the 10, sometimes you have to remind that white hat that they've got the end line there, or if we're at the 11, they've got the goal line. They probably remember that, but we like to think that we're a little bit sharper, so we try to help them out there, right?
I know that we've got the radios going on, and then also our referee. In some instances, some of stadiums around the state, you might have a field microphone you're working with,
right?
And that can be an aid as well.
Right. But the manual emphasizes that the radios, they don't replace the approved mechanics or crew communication signals that we're supposed to follow. So again, the radios, they're an aid. They're not a replacement.
Absolutely. I jumped to the field microphone too soon there. I apologize about that, folks. So, and I know we're running a little long on this show, so we appreciate everybody kind of sticking with us. So this was a longer section to get through. So we've got our field microphone here. If you do have one of those, give yourself extra time to that game when you get there in case you need to get that hooked up. Go out there, give it a test. Always make sure you're aware of when it's on and when it's off. There have been plenty of movie references out there that you all could Google and check that out. But we're using this primarily as a device to, again, just to get that out from the PA to the crowd to say this is the foul that has happened, and this is what's going to happen, the down, the distance, and all that. Again, the manual does kind of outline that. It's important when the referee gets out there to give that explanation in conjunction with any signal you might have for the foul, state the defending team, and state the enforcement. And then if there's any other significant information, if it was during a kick or during a return, if we might have a PSK involved. If it penalty involves replaying it down, we're going to indicate that we're replaying the down. If it's for a dead ball foul, then we'll indicate the down after that. Or if there's a loss of down, we'd indicate that as well too. When you're going to make this announcement, find an open space as a referee so you're out and kind of away from players so you can be easily seen and you can give your announcement. You're not worried about bumping into anybody trying to get back to their huddle. It's also a good idea if you have multiple fouls or a convoluted play, keep an official other than the referee near the referee so they can walk them through what's going on and who's got the ball and what penalty actually occurred there. one comment that the mechanics manual talks about is it's recommended that the words dead ball not be used in the announcement, even though we know it, the dead ball signal is being used. Say things like prior to the play or after the play, those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that's an awfully good overview this week of communication signals, mechanics, and the aids that we have in terms of radios. I appreciate your time, Michael, and I appreciate all of your time for joining us once again for another episode of Learn Your Stripes. We'll be back next week with our first guest, and we're going to discuss crew preparation in the week leading up to a game, pre-game mechanics, a White Hat's expectations for their crews during and prior to a game, and much more. For now, though, we're going to leave you with another play to consider, another one that, as wings, this is one of special importance to us.
So this is another sea leather play. This is back from 2019. Bear with us again. 3rd and 3 for A at the B47. It's prior to the snap. Simultaneously, A79 false starts and B92 lined up in the neutral zone. Both wings have flags, but can't determine which occurred first. They were very close in time. Can both happen and the penalties offset? If not, which foul is enforced? Why? And let us know your ruling. Again, thanks everybody for hanging with us this week, and we really appreciate it.
With that play, though, 2 more things to consider. Number 1, what's the play clock going to be afterward? Number 2, when the wings are coming in to discuss it, where do they hold this discussion? Have that be part of your answer to this play as well. We'll discuss that play at the start of our episode next week. In the meantime, though, if you wanted to let us know what your ruling would be, or if you have any questions or feel we made a mistake, please email us at learnyourstripes@gmail.com. Please also follow us on Facebook at Learn Your Stripes Podcast and on Twitter at LYS, Learn Your Stripes, LYS_podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, please also rate us 5 stars and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. On a personal note, my wife has taken on the job as our producer in terms of editing and uploading these podcasts, and I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful for her and for her time in doing so. But with all of that, I want to thank Michael once again. I want to thank all of you for tuning in, and we'll see you back here next week. In the meantime, though, keep learning your stripes.